For centuries, humanity has been sold a narrative of absolute separation. We have been systematically conditioned to believe that the creator of the universe, the architect of existence itself, resides behind an impenetrable wall. We are taught that we are inherently unworthy, distant, and disconnected. This narrative breeds fear and a constant sense of inadequacy. To bridge this manufactured gap, an entire industry was born. An industry of intermediaries. We are told that to reach him, to even whisper a prayer that might be heard, we require a middleman, a guru, a priest, a pastor, a complicated set of rituals, specific locations, and rigorous traditions. But what if this entire system, this massive structure of institutionalized religion, is fundamentally broken? What if the very institutions claiming to be the bridge to God have actually become the barricade keeping you from Him? The simple, profound truth that they forgot to tell you, or perhaps chose to withhold, is that the bridge is already built and the door is already open. You do not need a middleman to access the divine. To fully grasp the magnitude of this truth, we must look at the historical and spiritual reality of the veil. In ancient Jerusalem, the temple was the epicenter of the world. At its very heart was a room known as the Holy of Holies, the earthly dwelling place of God's presence. Separating this sacred space from the rest of humanity was a veil. But this was not a mere piece of fabric. Historical records suggest it was woven from thick yarn, a colossal, unyielding wall of textiles, making it a physical manifestation of a profound spiritual barrier. No ordinary person could even look upon it. Only one man, the high priest, was permitted to pass through this veil, and only once a year, under strict and terrifying conditions. It was said they would even tie a rope around the priest's ankle, just in case he was struck dead in the presence of the Almighty, and his body needed to be dragged out. The psychological weight of this system was immense. The message was clear and intimidating. Keep out. God is unapproachable. You must send someone else to speak on your behalf. Then came the ultimate disruption. As Christ drew his final breath on the cross, the earth shook, and in that precise fraction of a second, the historical account records an event of cosmic significance. That massive, impenetrable veil in the temple was violently torn in two. From top to bottom, this specific detail is paramount. If men had torn it, they would have started at the bottom. But this was torn from the heavens downwards. It was the Creator himself breaking out, and simultaneously inviting you in. This was not merely a symbolic gesture. It was the definitive, violent end of the middleman. The tearing of the veil was God's declaration that the era of exclusive, restricted access was permanently over. Yet, look at the religious institutions today. By demanding that you go through human intermediaries, modern religious systems are attempting to stitch back together a veil that God himself has torn apart. They place a heavy burden of performance, ritual, and financial obligation upon people. They offer a transactional relationship with the Creator, distracting millions from the true essence of faith. But the ancient instruction is profoundly simple, yet radically transformational. Seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you. The kingdom is not a building. It is that direct, unfiltered connection. When you establish that authentic communion, bypassing the religious noise to speak directly to the Father, everything shifts. The byproducts of a life aligned with the divine, deep peace, unshakable mental clarity, absolute purpose, and yes, prosperity in all its forms naturally follow. They are the added things, the natural consequence of walking alongside the divine, not the ultimate goal. The true wealth is the unhindered access. The veil is gone. The question is, why are you still standing outside? Now that we understand the veil has been permanently removed, a crucial question remains. Why do so many of us still act as though it is intact? Why? When the doors to the throne room are thrown wide open, do millions choose to stand in the courtyard, waiting for someone else to go in their place. This brings us to the trap of the middleman. Human nature, conditioned by centuries of institutionalized religion, often seeks the path of least spiritual resistance. It feels safer, easier, and considerably less demanding to delegate our spiritual journey to a professional. We crave a guru, a charismatic leader, or a rigid system to interpret the divine for us, to tell us what God is saying, and to assure us that we are in His favor. But this delegation comes at a catastrophic cost. When you place a human being, no matter how well-intentioned, highly educated, or devout they may seem, between you and the Creator, you are accepting a second-hand spiritual experience. You are settling for the echoes of God's voice rather than hearing Him directly. Spiritual gatekeeping is deeply embedded in human history. Even in ancient texts, we see a recurring pattern. People, terrified of the raw, unfiltered presence of the divine, pleading with their leaders to speak to God on their behalf, so they wouldn't have to face Him themselves. This inherent fear is the very foundation upon which the modern industry of intermediaries is built. The system subtly whispers that you lack the theological knowledge, the moral purity, or the specific ritualistic formula required to be heard. Artificial hierarchies are constructed, placing a select few at the top to dispense blessings, and the everyday believer at the bottom, dependent on their approval. This structure inevitably leads to control. When someone else convinces you that they hold the keys to your spiritual peace, they simultaneously gain power over your life, your decisions, and very often, your finances. It transforms a relationship of profound love into a transaction based on compliance and fear. The tragic irony is that the Creator never intended for faith to be a franchise. He never designed a corporate ladder for you to climb to reach His presence. The direct connection is not a special reward reserved for an elite class of holy men. It is the fundamental right of every individual, secured the moment that veil was torn. Breaking free from this trap requires a radical, courageous shift in perspective. It demands that you take absolute personal responsibility for your own connection to the divine. It means stepping past the self-appointed gatekeepers, ignoring the endless theological red tape, and walking boldly into the space that has already been cleared for you. You have the inherent capacity to hear, feel, and understand the Creator's direction for your own life without a translator. The middleman is obsolete once you realize that the only true validation you need comes directly from the source. The entire illusion of religious control shatters. So, if the veil is gone and the gatekeepers are obsolete, how do you actually establish this direct connection? For years, the industry of religion has sold us steps to divine revelation. They have packaged prayer as a transaction, but the Creator of the cosmos is not a vending machine. The truth is far simpler. Yet it requires a level of discipline that most modern people are terrified to embrace. The discipline of stillness. To tune into the unfiltered frequency of the divine, you must first turn off the profound noise of the world and the relentless chatter of religious anxiety. God rarely competes with chaos. The connection is forged in silence. It requires you to sit alone, without a sermon playing in the background, and without a predefined list of demands. You do not need to speak perfectly. You simply need to be present. This is an active, intentional positioning of your mind to receive. When you bypass the middleman and begin to cultivate this quiet communion, you will realize that the Creator's voice does not always manifest as a booming echo. More often, it is an undeniable inner knowing. It is a sudden, crystalline clarity about a decision you must make. It is an overwhelming sense of peace in the midst of a storm. Religion teaches you to doubt this inner compass, insisting that you need external validation from a human authority. But when you establish a genuine, unfiltered connection, the validation is internal. You know the voice. The practice is not about learning a new language. It is about unlearning the religious static that has been jamming your receiver for your entire life. A significant part of breaking free from the middleman is dismantling the illusion of religious rituals. For generations, institutionalized faith has operated on a transactional model. If you perform a specific set of actions, you will earn the Creator's favor. We have been taught to mistake exhaustion for devotion. We sing the right songs, stand at the correct moments, recite memorized passages, and tick the boxes of religious duty. Believing this choreography equals spiritual depth. But ritualistic performance is often just a sophisticated way of hiding. It is entirely possible to perfectly execute every religious tradition while remaining completely disconnected from the divine. The Creator is not seeking employees to fulfill a spiritual quota. He desires a relationship. When the veil was torn, it destroyed the need for the checklist. True communion is found in authenticity, not in rehearsed performances. You can drop the act. You do not need to impress the source of all creation with how well you play the game of religion. You simply need to be honest. To maintain their position, gatekeepers require leverage. Throughout history, the most effective leverage in the religious industry has been weaponized guilt. If an institution can convince you that you are perpetually flawed, constantly failing, and inherently distant from God, you will always need their services to bridge the gap. They sell the poison and then charge you for the antidote. This relentless cycle of guilt and temporary absolution is designed to keep you dependent. But the direct connection shatters this paradigm. The tearing of the veil was a declaration of absolute clearance. It means your past mistakes, your flaws, and your human imperfections are not a barrier to the Creator, unless you allow them to be. The divine frequency operates on grace, not condemnation. When you bypass the middleman, you stop outsourcing your forgiveness, you learn to stand in the presence of God without the crushing weight of religious shame, realizing that true repentance is a private recalibration of your heart, not a public performance to satisfy a religious authority. Let us examine the most powerful, yet frequently distorted, directive in spiritual history. Seek first the kingdom of God and His righteousness. Religious systems often interpret the kingdom as their specific church or ministry. They manipulate this verse to mean you should dedicate your resources to building their earthly empires. But the kingdom of God is not a geographical location or a corporate entity. The kingdom is a state of alignment. It is the internal governance of the Creator operating within your own mind and actions. Seeking it first means prioritizing that direct, unfiltered connection above all else. It means making decisions based on divine principles of integrity, wisdom, and love, rather than operating from a place of fear or ego. When you align your internal compass with the frequency of the Creator, you are effectively bringing the kingdom into your everyday reality. It is a solitary, powerful act of allegiance that no institution can control or replicate. This brings us to the second half of that profound ancient instruction. And all these things shall be added unto you. The religious world is bitterly divided over the concept of prosperity. One extreme demonizes wealth, preaching that poverty is a sign of holiness. The other extreme twists faith into a transaction, turning God into a cosmic banker who responds to financial donations. Both are distortions. When you bypass the middleman and seek the direct connection first, prosperity is not a reward for religious good behavior. It is a natural, inevitable consequence of alignment. When you are tuned into the Creator's frequency, you receive unparalleled clarity. You make better decisions. You avoid toxic environments and destructive habits. The chaos that drains your energy and resources begins to dissipate. Mental peace leads to physical health. Divine wisdom leads to innovation and financial stability. These are the added things. They flow into your life not because you manipulated a religious system, but because you are operating in harmony with the architect of abundance. If the connection is direct and the middleman is obsolete, the battlefield shifts. The barrier is no longer a physical veil in a temple. The barrier is the architecture of your own mind. Years of institutional programming leave mental residue. You may intellectually understand that you have direct access, but your subconscious still expects punishment, still fears the gatekeepers, and still doubts your ability to hear the Creator. Renewing the mind is the critical work of this new spiritual freedom. You must actively deconstruct the toxic theology that was planted in you. This means questioning everything you were told about a God who requires human managers. It requires evicting the voices of fearful religious leaders from your head. You must prepare the soil of your mind to receive a different kind of seed, one that grows into self-governance and spiritual maturity. The Creator's voice requires a mind that is not cluttered with religious static. The ultimate triumph of institutional religion was convincing humanity that God only resides in designated buildings on specific days of the week. They compartmentalized the divine, turning faith into a weekend hobby. But when the veil was torn, the presence of the Creator spilled out of the holy room and into the streets. Your direct connection is not meant to be confined to a sanctuary. True spiritual power is demonstrated in the marketplace, in your business, in your home, and in your creative endeavors. When you carry the unfiltered frequency of the divine into your everyday life, you change the atmosphere around you. Your work becomes a form of worship. The wisdom you receive directly from the source gives you an undeniable edge in every secular pursuit. You do not need to retreat to a monastery to be holy. You are called to bring the order, peace, and prosperity of the kingdom into the chaos of the real world. We have analyzed the history, dismantled the traps, and exposed the illusion of the middleman. The narrative of separation is a manufactured lie designed to maintain control. The physical veil was torn from top to bottom, a violent and permanent eviction of the gatekeepers. The bridge is built, and the access is absolutely free. Yet, the final step remains entirely up to you. You can choose to remain in the courtyard, comfortable in the predictable routines of a broken religion, paying the emotional and financial tolls demanded by human intermediaries. Or you can make the terrifying, exhilarating decision to walk through the torn veil. It requires courage to stand before the Creator without a script and without a human shield. It requires absolute personal responsibility. But on the other side of that threshold is a life of unimaginable clarity, profound peace, and authentic prosperity. When you first make this conscious decision to step away from institutionalized religion, you will likely encounter an unexpected phase, the detox period. For years, your spiritual senses have been overloaded with manufactured stimuli. You are accustomed to loud music manipulating your emotions, charismatic speakers directing your thoughts, and a relentless schedule keeping you busy. When all of that suddenly stops, the initial silence can be deafening. The religious system conditions you to equate constant activity with spiritual health. Therefore, when you are simply sitting in stillness, you might feel like you are doing something wrong. You might feel disconnected, but this is an illusion. This silence is not emptiness. It is the clearing of the static. It is the necessary withdrawal from the adrenaline of religious performance. You must endure this detox. You must allow your spiritual hearing to adjust to the subtle, profound frequency of the divine. Breaking free from the gatekeepers is a solitary act of courage, but it rarely goes unnoticed by the crowd. When you stop participating in the endless cycle of religious performance, the system will push back. You will be misunderstood. Friends who are still deeply entrenched in the institutional mindset may accuse you of losing your faith, or of becoming arrogant because you claim to hear the Creator without their approved methods. This is a crucial test of your resolve. You must understand that their reaction is rooted in fear, not in truth. The system trains its followers to view anyone who escapes its borders as a threat. Do not argue with the gatekeepers, and do not waste your energy trying to justify your direct connection to those who are determined to defend the veil. Your ultimate defense is the undeniable transformation in your own life, the peace, the clarity, and the quiet prosperity that no institution can argue against. It is impossible to discuss the tearing of the veil without confronting one of the most deeply rooted mechanisms of control, the business of faith. The religious industry requires immense capital to sustain its buildings. its programs, and its hierarchies. To secure this funding, the concept of giving has frequently been weaponized. The instruction to seek first the kingdom has been twisted into a financial transaction, where God's favor and protection are allegedly activated by your financial donations to a specific institution. This turns the Creator into a cosmic broker, and the gatekeepers into debt collectors. But consider the reality of the torn veil. If you have unrestricted access to the architect of the universe, your prosperity is not held hostage by a religious tax. Generosity is a beautiful and divine principle, but it must flow from a place of absolute freedom and internal direction, not from institutional coercion or the fear of divine punishment. When you bypass the middleman, your resources are free to be directed by the Spirit, impacting the real world, rather than merely funding the maintenance of the veil. The traditional religious structure thrives on a very specific, terrifying definition of sin. It is often presented as a permanent stain, requiring constant intervention by a priest or pastor to mediate your forgiveness. This keeps you in a perpetual state of spiritual anxiety. However, the original meaning of the word sin in ancient texts was an archery term, to miss the mark. When the veil was torn, the dynamic of dealing with our human flaws shifted completely. Because the access is direct, when you miss the mark, you do not need a human tribunal to grant you absolution. The direct connection allows for immediate recalibration. It is a private, internal correction between you and the Father. You acknowledge the misalignment, adjust your aim, and move forward without the heavy baggage of religious shame. The Creator is not a tyrannical judge waiting to strike you down. He is the ultimate calibrator, constantly drawing you back into alignment with His perfect frequency. One of the most damaging lies perpetuated by the middleman is the division between the sacred and the secular. We are taught that God is present in the church building, but absent in the office, in the laboratory, or in the art studio. This creates a schizophrenic existence where we act holy on Sundays and operate purely on human survival instincts for the rest of the week. But the tearing of the veil destroyed this artificial boundary. The entire earth is the Lord's. This means your business strategy can be divinely inspired. Your approach to a difficult conversation can be guided by the Spirit. The way you treat your clients, design a product, or manage your finances becomes a holy endeavor when you are walking in direct connection with the Creator. Everything you touch becomes a space where the kingdom can be established. If we eliminate the religious scripts, how do we actually communicate with the divine? Institutional prayer is often reduced to a list of demands, a desperate plea to convince a distant God to change His mind and intervene in our chaos. It is rooted in a beggar's mentality. But direct, unfiltered prayer operates on a completely different architecture. It is not about begging, it is about alignment. When you enter the silence, your primary goal is not to inform the Creator of your problems. He already knows them. Your goal is to align your frequency with His perspective. It is a recalibration of your thoughts. You declare truth over your situation. You listen for the strategy, the wisdom, and the specific next step. Direct prayer is powerful because it shifts you from a state of passive desperation to a state of active partnership. You are no longer asking a gatekeeper to fix your life. You are cooperating directly with the architect to build it. A massive barrier keeping people behind the veil is the fear of not knowing enough. The religious system prizes theological perfection. They have vast libraries of complex doctrines and strict criteria for who is considered orthodox. This intellectual intimidation makes the average person feel utterly unqualified to approach God directly. They think they must rely on the experts. This is a profound trap. The Creator of the universe is not an academic demanding a flawless thesis before granting an audience. The torn veil was an invitation to the uneducated, the broken, and the simple. Profound spiritual truth is often revealed to those who approach with raw authenticity. Your lack of a theological degree is not a disqualification. It is an advantage. It means your mind is less cluttered with human traditions. making you a clearer vessel for the unfiltered voice of the Spirit. As you embrace this spiritual independence, a critical responsibility emerges. How do you pass this on? If you have children or influence over the next generation, you face a profound choice. Will you subject them to the same religious programming, the same guilt trips, and the same reliance on gatekeepers that you had to painfully deconstruct? Or will you teach them the reality of the torn veil from the very beginning? Raising a generation in direct connection means teaching them to trust their own spiritual intuition. It means showing them how to sit in silence and hear the Creator's voice for themselves, rather than making them dependent on a youth pastor. You equip them with the understanding that they are entirely worthy of God's presence, directly and unconditionally. When a child grows up knowing the door is open, they do not waste their adult lives trying to pick the lock of religious acceptance. They step straight into their purpose. Institutional religion often breeds a victim mentality. It teaches you to wait passively for God to rescue you, to constantly focus on your weaknesses, and to view the world as a terrifying place from which you must be saved. But the direct connection activates a radically different identity. When you realize you have unrestricted access to the source of all power and wisdom, you stop being a victim of your circumstances. You step into your inherent role as a creator. The ancient texts say we are made in the image of the divine. This is not a physical resemblance. It is an operational mandate. You were designed to take dominion, to bring order out of chaos, and to produce value. By bypassing the middleman, you access the raw creative energy necessary to build businesses, solve complex problems, and forge strong relationships. You stop waiting for a religious miracle and start collaborating with God to create one. A deeply entrenched fear within many religious circles is the concept of generational curses. We are often taught that we must suffer for the sins of our ancestors, and that breaking these unseen chains requires complex religious deliverance sessions led by experts. This ideology keeps believers perpetually dependent on the gatekeepers for spiritual cleansing. However, the reality of the torn veil fundamentally rewrites this narrative. When you establish a direct, unmediated connection with the Creator, you are not merely adopting a new belief system. You are undergoing a spiritual genetic rewrite. The frequency of the divine is absolute and transformative. It does not negotiate with the past. The moment you bypass the middleman and align your mind with the kingdom, the inherited patterns of poverty, addiction, or emotional instability lose their jurisdiction over your life. You become the definitive endpoint for historical trauma and the starting point for a new legacy. The Creator's direct presence acts as a firewall, neutralizing the toxic momentum of the past. You do not need a priest to perform an exorcism on your family tree. You simply need to stand firmly in your direct connection, exercising the authority that is inherent to your spiritual inheritance. The curse is broken not by a ritual, but by the overwhelming light of an unfiltered connection to the source. Let us dive deeper into the controversial waters of prosperity. The truth, accessible only when you step away from the noise, is vastly more elegant than what institutions teach. True prosperity is an echo. It is the natural reverberation of a life completely aligned with the principles of the Creator. When you operate out of fear, greed, or manipulation, you introduce friction into your life. This friction destroys wealth, health, and peace. Conversely, when you seek first the kingdom, you are adopting the operational framework of God. You begin to act with unshakable integrity, supreme wisdom, and genuine value creation. The marketplace responds to these qualities. Money is merely a neutral mechanism of exchange. It flows towards value, order, and solution makers. When your direct connection to the Father makes you a better leader, a sharper thinker, and a more resilient entrepreneur, financial increase is the inevitable mathematical outcome. It is not a magical reward dropped from the sky. It is the physical manifestation of your spiritual alignment. The middleman wants you to believe you must pay the church to be blessed. The truth is, your alignment with the Creator makes you a magnet for the added things. One of the most terrifying realizations upon leaving institutionalized religion is the sudden absence of the crowd. For your entire life, the congregation has provided a psychological safety net, but profound spiritual truth is rarely found in the consensus of the masses. Embracing the torn veil means accepting that your spiritual journey will largely be a solitary path. You must train yourself to value the quiet validation of the Creator's voice above the loud applause of the religious majority. The echo chamber of the church provides comfort, but it stifles growth. When you finally step outside, the isolation may feel jarring at first, but it is precisely in that uncharted territory that the most authentic communion with the divine takes place. The clearest indicator that you have successfully bypassed the middleman and tapped into the direct frequency of the Creator is the sudden arrival of an illogical, unshakable peace. This is not the fragile peace that comes from a lack of problems. It is a muscular, aggressive peace that thrives in the middle of the storm. When you know, with absolute certainty, that you have immediate access to the architect of the universe, the panic of everyday life begins to dissolve. You stop reacting to circumstances with fear and start responding with divine strategy. This peace is the ultimate competitive advantage in the marketplace and the ultimate foundation for a healthy family. The gatekeepers cannot sell you this peace. It is a sanctuary built entirely within your own mind through direct communion with the Father. We must completely dismantle the religious definition of worship. The industry of faith has successfully convinced millions that worship is a genre of music or a specific emotional state achieved on a Sunday morning. But when the veil was destroyed, the concept of the altar was decentralized. Worship is not a song. It is a posture of existence. If the connection is direct and constant, then every action you take can become an act of profound reverence. When you build a business with impeccable honesty, that is worship. When you treat your family with the sacrificial love of the Creator, that is worship. Your entire life, in all its messy, practical reality, becomes the sacred ground where you honor the divine. There is a comfortable laziness in institutional religion. It is far easier to pay someone else to interpret the mysteries of the universe than it is to do the heavy lifting yourself. This spiritual delegation is the root cause of the widespread immaturity seen in modern believers. By relying on the pastor to be your spiritual proxy, you are effectively abdicating your throne. Stepping through the torn veil requires you to take your crown back. It demands rigorous personal study, deep meditation, and the courage to wrestle with complex spiritual realities on your own. Stop asking the gatekeeper to chew your spiritual food for you. A direct consequence of reclaiming your spiritual autonomy is the activation of true authority. The historical texts are explicit. The authority to heal, to cast out darkness, and to shift atmospheres was granted to every single person who aligns with the kingdom. If sickness attacks your body or chaos threatens your home, you do not need to wait for a Sunday service to receive a prayer. You have the authorization to speak directly to the mountain and command it to move. If there is one primary currency that keeps the religious industry afloat, it is fear. The fear of hell, of divine punishment, of missing the mark. But fear and the frequency of the Creator cannot coexist in the same space. Bypassing the middleman means aggressively unlearning this fear. The Creator is not standing over you with a hammer. He is the ultimate Father, entirely invested in your success. When you walk through the torn veil, the guidance system becomes internal. You begin to experience moments of sudden, brilliant clarity that defy logical analysis. This is divine intelligence downloaded directly into your consciousness. Ultimately, the decision to abandon the broken religious system and embrace the direct connection is an act of generational warfare. By choosing to walk away from the gatekeepers, you are establishing a new baseline of spiritual freedom for everyone who comes after you. The legacy of the unfiltered connection is a bloodline of independent thinkers, confident creators, and spiritually sovereign individuals who understand how to operate the principles of the kingdom in the real world. The veil was torn to make this reality possible. The path is clear. Do not let the noise of a dying religious system keep you from the magnificent inheritance that is yours to claim.